You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome to the Radiance Films Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Radiance Films. I am your host, Adam Lundy, and I'm joined today by YouTuber, critic, boutique physical media connoisseur, Elliot Coen. Hello, Elliot.
Hello, Adam. Thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the podcast so far. It's got off to a great start.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you coming on, reaching out about wanting to do something like this. It's great that I'm having so many, you know, so many content creators that I respect and that I follow reach out to me about coming on and doing episodes. So it's been great for me being such a, a young new podcast to have so much interest, and for people like yourself who have a significant following to want to come on and want to talk about these movies. I'm just happy people are enjoying stuff. So it's an absolute
Yeah.
pleasure to have you on.
Well, what I always say to people when I do these kind of things is, and I think you said this in your last episode, in my own life, in my social life, and with my family, barely anyone is into this kind of stuff. So I don't get to speak often. So basically, any chance I can get, I will take it.
That's the thing, and I found that with so many people who do movie podcasts, because obviously I do this one, not to beat this horse as I beat it every episode. I have another podcast, They Live by Film, and then we're part of a wider kind of podcasting network with, about at this point there's nearly a dozen other podcasts in the network. And we talk about this stuff all the time that, for a lot of us it is just a social aspect. There and I suppose maybe this is a good time for me to maybe give some clarity about where I stand within the Radiance framework. I'm not officially associated with Radiance. This is a fan podcast, not officially sanctioned. Obviously, Fran was on the episode. He knows, what this is about and stuff. But, this is not an official podcast. I'm not on the Radiance payroll. I don't get the films for free or anything. I just love this company and I love talking about the films. So having a way to talk about these films with people through this podcast is just a great hobby for me because my wife doesn't care about these movies, and I don't know anyone in real life who collects physical media at all, let alone, specifically Radiant stuff. So, having so many people who are really passionate about, this company and the films that they put out, to the point where they want to come on and talk about them, not just in the comments on Reddit or Facebook or wherever, but actually to sit down and have a conversation about these movies. It's refreshing, and it's great for me because it gives an outlet where there normally wouldn't be one.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, look, just in case people are not familiar with who you are, of course, I'm going to have the links to all your stuff in the description, but maybe just give a quick intro for yourself, Elliot, just so people can get acquainted.
Yeah, sure. So I make videos on YouTube talking about physical media and boutique Blu-rays and basically everything I've been watching, which is quite a wide variety of stuff. Um, I mean, there's proper cult stuff, there's classic cinema, world cinema, big blockbuster cinema, and mainstream 4K releases, etc. So yeah, I like to share what films I've been enjoying, and I always say if I can just share it with one person and help one person find a new film they love, then the video is a success to me. So that's my goal, and yeah, that's what I've been doing now for quite a few years.
Yeah, and your content is great. It really is fantastic. You've a ton of subscribers on your YouTube. I think over 30,000 at this rate.
Yeah,
Uh,
something like that.
So you have a ton of people following you, and again, when I was sort of mentioning about people wanting to come onto the podcast in my podcasting network, when I'd mentioned that you would, we'd kind of communicated about doing this, everyone in my network was really excited because they all love your stuff as well, and they're really looking forward to this episode coming out. So, yeah, if you're listening to this and you somehow haven't come across Elliot's content before, which if you're into boutique Blu-rays, I'd be surprised. But if you haven't, definitely go down to his YouTube channel and just binge watch because it's really, really great stuff.
Yeah, I did the cheeky thing a few years ago of changing my YouTube channel name to put boutique Blu-rays in the name, so that I would hopefully,
Gotta hit that
find
algorithm.
yeah, find people that way. So if someone's Googling, a boutique Blu-ray, then I should pop up, which might have helped.
With how Google's AI sort of powered searching these days, who knows? But I'd say you probably have to pay somebody off to get in their algorithm these days. But
Yeah.
um, I'm sure you definitely got a few people in the door initially that way. Um, Perfect. So this is a vault episode. So if you're new to the podcast, what that means is we're going into the vault of Radiance Films. Obviously, this is a newish podcast. So there's obviously a ton of stuff that Radiance have released over the last kind of 18 months or so that otherwise I would never have gotten a chance to talk about, that I want to talk about. So I'm going to be diving back into the catalog and bringing guests on to talk about films. I'm always going to try and keep it somewhat thematically connected. So when I get an opportunity to pick a box set, that just makes sense. So the way that this box set was chosen, interestingly enough, it was actually done through a popular vote on the Radiance sort of fan Facebook group. So there's a group on Facebook, just people who enjoy Radiance films. They just have a group, and there's a quite a significant amount of members now. I think it's well over 1,000. And I literally just put up a vote between this and another box set, the Shinobi set, to see which people would prefer to listen about. And now I will cover Shinobi at some point as well, but the one that won was the Bounty Hunter Trilogy, which, if you can read the title of this episode, you'll know that already. Or if you're in that Facebook group, you'll also know that already because it won by quite a significant margin. So we're going to be talking about the Bounty Hunter Trilogy today. And then obviously we'll cover Shinobi in a different episode for those who voted for Shinobi and are perhaps disappointed. I will get to Shinobi eventually, don't worry. Um, so the Bounty Hunter set, I'm trying to remember exactly when it came out. It's been out for a little while. I should have actually probably pulled this up before we started recording. So let me just try and find it. I can't remember how recent it was. So then I didn't get a
Yeah.
chance to watch it when it came out. I only literally just watched it for this episode and made my way through it. Obviously, I've had it on my shelf since it came out, but I'm trying to find when that
Was
actually
it
was.
was it even this year? I can't I
I think
lose
it may
track
have
of
been
time.
last year. Well, actually, it's a good question. Let me see. Box set. I'm just on the Radiance website now. Bounty Hunter Trilogy. So this is the standard edition. So I can probably base it off that. If the standard edition came out recently. Well, the standard edition came out last September. So this was obviously must have been last summer that this probably came out in the nice sort of fancy hard box set if you're lucky enough to pick that up. I would guess because I can't find it on the
I'm just
website
I'm
anymore.
having a look on on Blu-ray.com, and it
Oh, that's a
says that
much better idea.
the limited box came out in March this year,
Oh,
and then
that's odd.
the the reprint, the standard edition, literally came out 2 days ago.
Oh, well, it must just be a misprint on the website because it does say September 23. It is 2024, right? I haven't
Yes.
messed that up. Yeah. So, well, there we go. We found a misprint on the Radiance website because
I mean,
apparently
maybe they
this
just
came out
meant
last September.
the 23rd of September, but yeah, who
Yeah, well,
knows?
that's what I thought is 230923. So yeah, a slight typo there, unfortunately. But so sorry, you said it was March this year was when the box set came out.
Yeah, according to
Okay.
Blu-ray.com, yeah.
Which I guess it makes sense. Spine number wise, it is actually, not a million miles away from where we are now. This is spine 46 and 47, and we're currently in the 60s for the spine. So it does make sense that it came out this year at some point.
Yeah.
Obviously, Radiants have never been the most linear in terms of their spine numbers. Um, Up until now, I guess we are now fully up to date with spines. We're now spine complete. If you're a collector of, picking up everything, you'll be spine complete. Um, yeah, sorry to not go off on a tangent, Elliot, like we may have
No,
talked about. like we
Don't
may
worry.
have mentioned before we recorded, not to go off on a tangent.
I
Let's talk.
listen. I love tangents, so don't you don't have to apologize to me.
Perfect. So look, let's talk about Spine 46. So this is the only this spine is associated with just one film, whereas Spine 47 has two. The first film that we're going to talk about is Killer's Mission, which was the first one that was done by Shigehiro Ozawa, which was in 1969. It came out. Just to kind of read you the blurby bit from the disc. I've just opened it up here. So in Killer's Mission, directed by the Street Fighter Shigehiro Ozawa, Wakayama stars as Doctor and Secret Agent Ichibei, hired to prevent the sale of firearms to a local lord planning an uprising against the shogun with help from the Dutch government. So that's the blurby bit. I think one thing, at least, that I'll want to bring up during this, this is a trilogy, and connected by the main character of Ichibei. This kind of, well, in one film he's a spy, in another film he's this, and in another film he's that. This is kind of a common theme of this trilogy, that the character and the style changes with each film almost.
Mm.
Um, this kind of set, at least from what I recall, was kind of marketed as this was Japan's kind of answer to James Bond, but in a period setting. And this is probably the only film of the trilogy that I would agree with that sentiment. Um, I think out of the three, this is the most secret agenty, I guess,
Yes.
in terms of its plot, and in terms of Ichibei as a character. It's funny because the blurb mentions he's a doctor, but I don't think he became a doctor in this one. I don't think he becomes a doctor until, I don't recall the doctor part being mentioned in this one. Of course, he's
No.
obviously a doctor in the second and third one because we see him at his practice.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was a doctor in this film. So that blurb might be just taking future plot points and putting them in. Because in this one, he's just pretty much just a straightforward kind of mysterious figure, almost like, I suppose, again, there's a lot of Western influence here. Almost kind of like a man with no name, just you don't really know much about him or his past, and he's just hired to do this mission. And in typical kind of James Bond or Ethan Hunt style, he's kind of told, you do this, and if you fail, you know, where nobody's coming to save you, nobody's gonna help you out of this, everyone will deny everything. He is kind of sent on this kind of Mission Impossible espionage, which is really interesting to see in a period. But it's what was mainly interesting for me going through the set was that this was the only film that had that aspect, and it changes quite dramatically as they go on.
Yeah. And what's strange about that is I wonder if they saw that aspect as not being successful in the first film, and maybe they decided to change it over the course of the other two. Which is strange to me because watching this, as a modern audience, I think it's one of the most endearing things about this first film is like the James Bond gadgets and
Oh
the
yeah,
spying.
absolutely. Like this, like for me personally, this um might be a sort of spoiler for the episode, but this was probably my favorite out of the three.
Mm,
And I think it's definitely because of it just has uniqueness to it. There's a lot of things in the second and third film that you can go see in other films,
yeah.
and often better. Um, whereas in Killer's Mission, I don't think I've ever really seen anything like Killer's Mission in how anachronistic it is with the gadgets and with the espionage and spy themes, but in that kind of Chanbara, Jedi Geki setting.
Mm,
It's very rare. Like even in Western cinema, it's very rare to see, like, you wouldn't see a medieval film or like even a Western or anything like that. Anything kind of pre 1900. You would never see things like spying going on. Like the only the only example I can think of the top of my head about gadgets would be something like Wild Wild West with Will Smith. But historically speaking, you don't really see modern themes and kind of modern gadget use and stuff like that in period pieces, at least in Western cinema. And I suppose the same even in kind of Eastern cinema. It's not something I've ever really seen before. That kind of thing that he wears under his clothes that has all his gadgets. It's almost like it's almost like a Batman utility belt where he just
Yeah.
seems to have every gadget he could possibly need, like from throwing knives to smelling salts and everything like that. He just like anything he could possibly need. That he has this on this belt that goes around pretty much his entire torso.
Yeah.
It's full to the brim with stuff.
And
And
that I was going to say that's what makes this film so unique, I think. Not just
yeah.
compared to the other two films, but compared to everything else. There would have been a lot of films made in this period that are samurai films, Ronin films,
Mhm.
and they all kind of are doing something similar. It's usually about, the fault in the samurai code, and it's a bit of a satire on that, or it is just a kind of pure action thing.
Yeah.
This is having, a lot of playful fun with it at the same time.
Yeah, it's almost like they are taking the kind of Chanbara style film and trying to put a modern flavor on it. Like even something as simple as including guns. Like you don't see a lot of guns in a lot of period pieces.
Hmm.
It's usually either swords or it's like more modern, Yakuza style films that, take place, typically kind of post World War II. Um, I don't recall ever seeing a gun in a period Japanese film prior to this one. And of
Wow.
course, there would have been towards the end of that feudal period, it would have been the age where guns were becoming the weapon of choice, for warfarers. But I don't recall ever seeing one before, and I've watched my fair share of Jidaigeki, but I don't recall ever seeing a gun before this one.
Yeah, and I guess the plot of the film being about the Dutch people bringing the rifles to Japan.
Hmm.
Um, is there some kind of commentary there in the back about post-war Japan and becoming more globalized and taking in more American culture after World War II, etc. I don't know if that would have been a conscious thing, but certainly that's something I thought about when I was thinking more about this film.
Yeah, you're not out of line with that. So much post-war Japanese film is influenced by how society changed, post-war in real life in Japan,
Hmm.
with the US influence and stuff like that. So I like you're definitely not out of line. I wasn't personally thinking that, but now that you're saying it, you're certainly you could be onto something that, it could be a commentary on kind of the modernization of not just society, but even like warfare and crime and stuff like that in general after World War II.
Hmm.
Because, just even from a historical standpoint, World War II really, like, I know World War One is often called the first modern war, but World War II was on a whole other level. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, you could be onto something on that front. Um,
Yeah, and also on that kind of thing about modernizing and getting more modern weapons. A lot of Japanese films do try to bridge the gap between, um, a Chambara samurai film and then the modern Yakuza film, because they are quite similar often in themes and tone. And I
mhm.
feel like this film is trying to fast track that all within one film and very much go, here's us using swords, and now we're also using guns as well.
Yeah, it's if you take, another recent Radiance release, Tokujiro,
Mm,
um, the Takedo film, very much a kind of a plot that would fit with, post-war Yakuza film, but obviously set in a period era, but they don't go as far as pointing guns. I'm now hoping that they don't point guns in that film, as that'll make me seem rather stupid, seeing as I watched that film so recently. I really hope there's no guns in Tokujiro. I don't
I
recall
mean,
there being.
to be honest, I mean, I can't remember either. I don't think there were, but I mean, my mind is an absolute sieve, and I think once I've watched a film, I really need to make notes, otherwise it just kind of trickles into my deep memory.
Yeah, with Tokujiro, anyway, to the point you're making, it's a modern story in a period setting, but it doesn't go as far as, at least I hope it doesn't go as far as bringing physical modern elements into the period setting in the same way that
Mm.
Killer's Mission does, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that I was going to say on that note of, the film sort of blending these different types of ideas and images. It does feel very pulpy, doesn't it? It's very much like it's very
Oh, very much
digestible.
so.
Like I think, you could find someone who's into, action films, and if you put this film in front of them, they'd probably have a pretty good time. It's not very it's not impenetrable, is it?
No, certainly not. And I think this was something that Toei, the production company, was kind of known for, just, putting out films, that just regular people just want to go and kill 90 minutes watching it. I think a lot of these were even made to be like double bills. So obviously if you're gonna have a double feature, you're not gonna want 90 minutes of getting your head melted by something and then have to sit through a whole other 90 minutes of another film afterwards. A lot of these films were kind of designed to, like, I wouldn't call them simple per se, but to be digestible, like you said, to be entertaining,
Mm,
to have characters that are fun and engaging, even if they're not necessarily good people, they're interesting to watch, and to watch, their story unfold is engrossing to the
mm,
audience. Um, in the same way that, a lot of B movies in Hollywood, a lot of like film noirs and horror films, and even like grindhouse stuff, it was all designed to be, a breezy way to spend an hour and a half. And these films were, as far as I'm aware, were made in a similar vein. Um, but like with a lot of films that get made to be, kind of fodder for the audience, just kind of put them out, give them their 90 minutes, and then you never think about it again. A lot of the
mm.
times the filmmakers behind them were quite talented, so their efforts end up maybe becoming more influential and staying with audiences longer than perhaps the studios anticipated.
Yeah,
You can say that with, I'm a big fan of a lot of B noir, and you have stuff like, like Detour, for example, the Edgar J. Ulmer film.
yeah, great film.
Great movie. Cheap as hell. This was made to be as cheap as possible so that they could put it on the back of something else when it was being released. And it ends up becoming
Mm,
one of the most influential noir films of all time.
yeah,
Never the intent of the studio, and stuff like Killer's Mission ends up being the same. It was made, just to be 90 minutes of fun for an audience, and then it ends up, kind of transcending that a little bit, which is great in cinema when that happens.
yeah. And what I love about Radiance, and it's been said many times before, that Radiance are comfortable putting this on the release slate next to other films which you would look at and think are maybe a bit more intellectual, or they're more critically acclaimed and they've won prestigious awards, etc. Some people would shy away from this kind of film normally because they might think it's, throwaway, pulpy trash or whatever. Um, when actually, there's a lot of merit here. There's a lot of great things going on, and I think it deserves to be seen on the same kind of level as the other more prestigious films.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like it, and obviously it's going to come down to personal taste at the end of the day. Like the next two films we're going to talk about, I don't think I enjoyed them as much as Killer's Mission.
Yeah, me
However, I'm
too.
glad that I watched them, because they were all interesting in their own way. And I've said this not just about Radiance, but about, boutique Blu-ray companies in general. It's great to have the option, because the option to watch a lot of these films didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. You know,
Mm.
even like 10 years ago, when it looked like the DVD and was dead and Blu-ray wasn't going to kick off and streaming started to gain traction, it looked like physical media was going to die. And then in the last 10 years, through, the likes of Criterion, kind of capturing an audience, and then other companies pop up, both in the States and then in region B and across the world now. It's it's almost harder to find a film that doesn't have a great release than it is, to the age of films becoming lost is seemingly behind us. It's great that you have companies that are willing to give a dedicated, good release, even if it's not Citizen Kane or whatever. But if the film could have an audience that it perhaps may not have had a chance to gain in a past life, it's great that a company like Radiance will take a chance on it. And they seem to take a chance a lot more than other companies might, especially
Yeah.
these days. There's a lot of companies out there that I would have collected a lot of that I rarely collect now because a lot of the stuff they've put out is just kind of stuff I've already seen or stuff that I can easily go and stream somewhere. Whereas with Radiance, when they release their slate every month, my reaction is normally, I've never heard of any of these movies. They sound great. I can't wait to pick them up. Um, and it's refreshing to have a company around who can still do that. And there's lots of them, of course. But of course, it's the Radiance podcast. So I'm glad that Radiance in particular are doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that, 100%.
Perfect. Any final thoughts on Killer's Mission?
Um, uh, like you said, I think it's the best of the three. Um,
Hmm.
there's like a few moments that I just absolutely love in this film. Early on, there's the scene where he's one of the female characters. He's like having a fight with her inside
Yes,
that room, and there's like suddenly all this wire work and like freeze frames and
freeze
everything.
frames.
And
Yes.
I was watching that for the first time when this first came out, and I was immediately in on this movie as soon as that scene happened. Um,
Yeah.
it was just a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love the freeze frames. It really caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting them. The freeze frames in that scene was really, really great. There's a lot of just little stylistic ticks in this film that just kind of give it that extra edge in terms of uniqueness. That character, Kagero, she'll appear in the next film as well before just not showing up in the third one and never
Yeah,
mentioned again. But she was particularly good in this one, to kind of like the kind of badass female ninja, I think is how she's kind of portrayed. But yeah, she's great in this film. She has a smaller role in the next film as well. But yeah, she was particularly good in this one. And there was another character as well who was interesting, the kind of other Ronin who was a bit of a sad sack, kind of a loser samurai. And I can't remember his character's name. But he was interesting as well. It's like there are a lot of side characters. To be fair, there are a lot of side characters in all three movies that I think are interesting. Um, but there's just something about the style and the plot of this one that pushes it a little bit higher up the list for me.
yeah. And lastly, I'll just say I really do like how the film looks. It does have an interesting look to it. And when I was looking up the information, the cinematographer of this film, there's a Radiance connection because he did Big Time Gambling Boss, which was one of
Ah,
the early
okay.
Radiance releases.
Yeah, it was on the very first slate.
Mm,
It has a higher spine number, but it was part of the first slate. So it's been a long time since I watched it. But yeah, that's interesting. And I found that a lot that it's not just directors that Radiance kind of release multiple films of. There often is other production connections as well. Obviously we've seen quite a few Toei releases at production companies, so I'm sure there's probably crew overlap as well in other films. Um, that are not strictly kind of director specific.
yeah,
And obviously there's been a few repeating actors and stuff as well. Which is nice to see. It's nice to make some new friends and have them show up again later down the line.
yeah, definitely.
Perfect. So we'll go on to The Fort of Death, which came out in 1969, so only 1 year after Killer's Mission. to read you the blurb for that. Um, Ichibei returns for let's say two more action-packed adventures. So in Ichie Kudo's The Fort of Death, he is sent on a seven samurai style mission to protect a village of farmers from a ruthless lord. Well, I'm glad the blurb said it because it kind of cuts half my job out. Um, yeah, this film is basically Seven Samurai meets The Wild Bunch.
Yeah.
Probably the best way to describe it. Um, and I forgot to mention this earlier, actually. If it hasn't become obvious by now, um, these reviews or discussions, whatever, they're going to be spoiler free. We're not going to be talking about like the end of movies or giving away spoilers or anything like that. Um, and I don't think I wouldn't call it a spoiler to call this one Seven Samurai meets the Wild Bunch because stylistically, there's a lot of similarities with those two films and this one. Um, as I mentioned, this one was directed by Ichie Kudo. So obviously, a different director to the first film. Um, and there's pretty noticeable differences stylistically, both with, just simply the type of film that it is, and also the character of Ichibei as well. This film is much more, as we were talking about, the kind of modernization of the Chanbara. This one is much more traditional Chanbara film. Um, this kind of idea of a band of warriors getting together to protect the innocent from the bad guy.
Mm.
Lots of swordplay, lots of sort of forts and stuff. It's very kind of traditional
Yeah.
Chanbara. Um,
Yeah. In a way, like I said before, I feel like perhaps the response of the first film might have changed something in how this film was made, because it does kind of feel like a step back, not in terms of quality, but in terms of pushing things forward. It is kind of looking backwards rather than forwards in many ways.
yeah, and perhaps the hiring of Kudo points to that as well. I watched there's a special feature that's on this disc, um, kind of like a visual essay about Kudo because I didn't know much about him. Obviously, I know he's where their Radiance are releasing another film of his in December, Yokohama
Mm.
BJ Blues. And I spoke about this on the last episode with the Fanatical Dragon, where he gave me a lot more context for Kudo because I didn't have much. Um, and between what he told me on the last episode and what I saw in the visual essay included with the disc, is that Kudo was very much a he was an action movie director. That's what he was known for. He was known as a guy. You hand him a script, he'll come in, he'll shoot everything really efficiently, he'll stay under budget. The studio heads loved him because of that, so he just got loads of gigs doing action films because he would just come in, do his job efficiently, and then move on to the next one. Um, so that could potentially point as to why this one maybe lacks a little bit of personality, I guess, maybe. Or certainly less unique in its presentation. This one kind of feels like a run-of-the-mill samurai film. And I say
Mm.
this as someone who's never really seen a run-of-the-mill samurai film because the only ones I ever watch are the ones that are, really critically acclaimed, like, the Kurosawa or Kobayashi and, stuff like that. So I only really watched the critical acclaimed ones, but I can only imagine there was probably 100 samurai films a year released in Japan. Um, in the same way that there was 100 westerns released, in the 50s in the US. Like I can only imagine it was similar. And I would probably imagine that a lot of them kind of looked and felt and played out just like this one.
Yeah. If you take a character like Zatoichi, there are like 20 odd Zatoichi films,
Yeah.
and they just all start to blend into one another by the end of that series.
And a TV show as well.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
they loved Zatoichi over there, which obviously ironically was played by Ichibei's brother in real life. Satoichi and Ichibei are the actors are brothers. So it's funny that you brought up Satoichi.
yeah.
Um,
And we
But
we didn't
yeah,
even mention Lone Wolf and Cub, did we? That
no, we
Wakayama.
didn't, of course, which is obviously the yeah, is probably what he's most known for, especially to Western audiences, with the kind of uh bastardization of the first couple of films for US audiences, Shogun Assassin.
Mm,
That's but yeah, Lone Wolf and Cub would probably be what most people will know. Um, will know Wakayama for. And he's a great actor. I really like. I enjoy him in all three films, even if the character changes a lot film to film. Like it's to the point where the characters have the same names. They're basically three different people in each film. But I enjoy him. He just has the kind of the old style action hero charm. Like
yeah.
maybe not as charismatic as an Arnold Schwarzenegger, but like a Jean-Claude Van Damme or Charles Bronson maybe is probably a better example. This kind of old style stoic action hero.
Mm,
He just has that charm about him. So I enjoyed his work in these films. I do enjoy the Lone Wolf films better. I haven't seen any Zatoichi movies. That will change later this year because I'm going to be covering them in my other podcast. Not all of them, obviously. I'd be here for 20 years. Um, but some of them. Um, but yeah, the character of Ichibi definitely dramatically changes in this film because he's no longer really a spy. He's a doctor, which we mentioned. It's never actually, as far as I was aware, it was never mentioned in the first film, but in this film, he starts off as a doctor, um, with that weird scene where the guy comes in with like, must have like gonorrhea or something, and Ichibe is tasked to solve it. And it's quite a funny scene, to be fair. In a series that doesn't have a ton of laughs, that particular scene is quite funny. Um, and then he is approached by a villager who's like, you in particular are the one who needs to help our village. And he just is like, yeah, okay, sure, I'll help your village. So he doesn't even really seem to be a spy or necessarily even a bounty hunter in this film. He's kind of more of like a folk hero who's kind of
yeah.
drafted in to save the village from this kind of evil shogun who wants to take it for reasons. I can't even really remember why. I don't think the plot semantics of why it was happening are too important. Because this film is unlike Killer's Mission, which is very much oriented on the spycraft. Um, this one is much more of a straight action film. So the plot
Mm,
semantics of why things are happening are less important.
yeah. I mean, I can't remember just thinking about these three films together. His incentive for doing these missions is it's never really for his own gain, is it? It's never really like he's
Um,
being paid a lot for it. I know obviously the third film is about the gold,
yeah, the
but
third
it's more
film is pretty explicitly he's doing it for the money. I'm trying to remember in the first one if he was
he's kind of just told he has to do it, isn't he? For,
he's
for
yeah,
the for
he's
the
like
emperor.
yeah, it's almost like James Bond, for the love of your country, you got to do this mission for us.
Yeah.
So it's and
So
this
yeah,
is this is it. The character dynamic changes so much as well
yeah. So the first one is for the government and the country. The second one's for the people, and then the third one is for the gold.
for the money. He's just uh,
He just changes.
I can just imagine this was probably Wakayama's uh sort of idea as well. He'll come back and do a third one for the gold, for the money. Otherwise, I'm not coming back for this third one. Um, but yeah, sorry, with the Fort of Death, I think this one's probably my least favorite of the three, and I think it's just because I've kind of seen it all before in other films that are better. That
Yeah.
I didn't really get anything in particular from this film that I couldn't get somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I think technically it's, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a bad movie or anything. It's a perfectly fine way to spend 90 minutes, which is, I'm sure, what the studio wanted. Just a perfectly fine way to spend 90 minutes, be entertained, and then go home and never think about it again. Um, but yeah, for me, it was fine. It was okay.
Yeah.
It unfortunately, what gripped me with the first film, the spycraft and the espionage. Unfortunately, all of that is cut from the second film. So yeah, my interest died down a good bit when I realized this was more of a straight action film.
Yeah. And I suppose avoiding spoilers, there is a moment towards the end of the film in terms of the action that is quite entertaining, though, in terms of
Yes,
how it all plays out.
for sure. Look, and I suppose like I hate being overly critical, but I feel like I have to give my honest opinion here with these films. But if you're a listener here and you're thinking, oh, I don't want to watch this or whatever, if you like action movies, you'll love this. Like if you just want to see swords flying and blood spraying and crazy stuff happening, then this will be right up your alley. Um, it's just I didn't like it as much as Killer's Mission because I just wanted something different. Now that I'd seen something different, I wanted the different to continue. So this felt like a regression. But if you're a fan of just like if you're just a fan of people cutting the shit out of each other with swords, and shooting the shit out of each other, then you'll love this film. It'll be up your alley. So don't feel like you shouldn't watch it just because I don't particularly love it.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. So because there's not a lot much more to talk about that one, do you want to move on to the final film, or do you have anything else you want to bring up with this?
No, let's move on.
Cool. So yeah, a couple of years later, so 1972, Shigehiro Ozawa came back to the series to make a film called Eight Men to Kill, which again, to read you the blurb from the disc itself. Um, where are we? The Street Fighter Shigehiro Ozawa returns to direct the third film in the series, Eight Men to Kill, in which Ichibei is hired to recover a cache of stolen gold from the government's mine. Yeah, there we go. Pretty much, and it's that plot is set up within the first 2 minutes of the film. Um, and I liked this one a good bit for like most of the runtime. I got about halfway through this film, and I was like, this might be my favorite one. And then it kind of lost it a bit. And there's some content in this movie in particular. It's present throughout the series, but there's some content in this film that it didn't really sit right with me. And this is mentioned on one of the special features as well. So this is not just a me thing, thankfully. But there's like quite a bit of misogyny that kind of runs through this series. But in this film in particular, it's pretty heavy-handed on the women hating,
Mm.
which is a bit unfortunate, and it does sour the experience. At least it did for me anyway. It soured the experience quite a bit. Um, because horrible things happen to women in this film in particular. And I was really enjoying it, for a decent chunk because it kind of starts off like a Mission Impossible movie, like the way a Mission Impossible movie starts off, the things kind of kick into gear and it becomes obvious what the mission is going to be. And then we're met with Ichibei, who's a doctor again. So that's consistent at least. Ozark kept that from the second film. He kept him as a doctor. Um, and yeah, he's kind of hired to go and retrieve this cachet and they believe it's been taken in by a bandit. And then it kind of pivots a little bit and it turns into something like for a few dollars more, or like a spaghetti western, which is so interesting just as an aside. Um, it's so interesting how full circle the influence went because you went from Sergio Leone ripping off Akira Kurosawa to the point where Kurosawa made more money off the Dollars trilogy than he did for Yojimbo. And
Mm.
then it goes full circle again where you have this Japanese film very heavily referencing spaghetti westerns, not just in terms of plot, but also visually. There's obviously a lot of like close up to eyes and stuff like that, standoffs. But even like the soundtrack is very kind of like sounds like it's from like a spaghetti western. Um,
Yeah.
I think this is definitely the most kind of Western influenced of the three stylistically as well. So once again, it's another stylistic pivot. Um, and even like this, the main plot about, a cache of gold going missing in a cavern and a bandit has it. Like you could transplant this film into a Western with very little issue. You would have very little problem, transplanting this plot and remaking it in the US as a Western.
Yeah.
It's very, very Western influenced. And I was enjoying that a lot because I do like spaghetti Westerns. So I was enjoying this film for quite a while. But then just so many horrible things started happening to women characters for like no good reason, which I'm not gonna sort of get into spoilers, as I said, in terms of exactly what happens and to whom. But just so many horrible things happen to the women characters in this film for absolutely no reason. So it just kind of soured the whole experience. And I do think also just plot wise things go a little bit hairy in the second half. It kind of loses itself a little bit.
Yeah.
But the first like 30, 40 minutes of this film are really great. And I thought this was going to be my favorite of the series. But unfortunately it didn't meet it didn't sort of have the consistency the whole way through the film.
Yeah, I think if you were being cynical, and I guess I will be cynical, that this one felt more like let's make some money kind of thing. They saw the success of spaghetti westerns. They made the film essentially that. There's a weird sex scene in there. Like
Yeah.
you said, all the gratuitous violence towards women, and it's just all very odd. It's like they took all these separate elements and thought this will all work and this will get people to the cinemas to watch it. And
Yeah,
I
and
think the end result just doesn't work because of that.
yeah, it's a bit muddled. And I can understand from a studio perspective why, because I know the Pink films were very popular around this time. Those kind of like, sex films or whatever. Um, they were sort of gaining popularity. So
Mm.
I can understand why they wanted to kind of put this melting pot of different things that were making a ton of money. But it doesn't make for a cohesive final product.
No, and you could
Unfortunately.
and you could say looking at those Pink films, at least they're doing one thing and they're kind of doing doing the
Yeah.
one thing as well as they can. If this film had chosen one thing to do, or one or two things, then it would have looked a bit more like Killer's Mission in kind of how it comes across.
hmm
Because
And
imagine if they diluted Killer's Mission with a weird sex scene and the violence towards women and made it more like what you could see in other films elsewhere, then it just wouldn't have been as good.
no. And that, like, out of the three, like, Killer's Mission was definitely the most consistent throughout the film. Because even with, The Fort of Death, which is for the most part quite a serious action film, there's obviously that scene I mentioned earlier, with where the guy's dick is gonna fall off. And it's funny. Like, I'm not like, I can be a child and say that the scene is funny. Um, but it's tonally inconsistent with the rest of the film. And Eight Men to Kill becomes, takes that sort of small moment of tonal inconsistency and drags it out over the entire second half of the film. Like I said, the first half of the film I think is really, really solid. It's good premise, it's interesting. Ichibe's back to being this kind of guy for hire rather than a man of the people folk here. He's back to being a bit of an asshole, um, which I prefer him as the kind of more of that kind of rogue, that kind of like a just kind of a roguish outlaw, like a man with no name or like a Han Solo type, that kind of love him, like the guy, he's an asshole, but you kind of like him. He has that
Yeah.
charm. Um, and he's like that in this film. But then yeah, like in the second half, just like I said, so many horrible things happen. And then matching that with the total inconsistencies, like the extremely like the gratuitous sex scene that just comes out of nowhere, has zero relevance on the plot and really just comes out of left field altogether. Um, and then just generally, I think the plot just kind of loses its steam. By the time we're getting around to the third act, we've kind of that the film has gone in a direction where it knows it needs to wrap up the plot, but we've gotten to a place now where we have a lot of different things to juggle around, but we also only have 5 minutes to wrap things up because we got to put this
Mm.
film as a second half of another feature. We can't be putting out 100 minute. We don't do triple digit runtimes here. Has to be under, has to be 90 minutes. So we need to wrap things up. So the second half, yeah, it's a shame what the second half ends up being because it's messy, both plot wise and tone wise. And then, like, I could probably excuse that if it wasn't for all of the misogyny. I could probably look past the messy plots because I've seen plenty of films with much messier plots that I've gone out and enjoyed. Um, but yeah, the misogyny just made it made this whole film kind of tough to enjoy and definitely soured the experience, altogether.
Yeah, because no one's watching those scenes and having a good time unless you're a complete weirdo, I guess. So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't really understand it. So many like there's so many unnecessary stuff in the film, and like I'm gonna like to try and do this as light spoiler wise as possible. There's a really interesting character that gets introduced, a really interesting female character who gets introduced to the film that you think she'll have a redemption arc during the film because she starts off kind of antagonistic and it's kind of set up for her to have a redemption arc. And then no, they just decide to have an utterly inhumane thing happen to her and she's never seen again for the rest of the film. Um, it was it really just like took me out of it because I was like, I was really wanting to see this character get her revenge, have her story wrap up. But instead, a horrible thing happens to her and we never see her again for the rest of the film. And it just
mm,
really, really just took me out of it. Um, so yeah, it's an unfortunate way to end a series that started so strong with Killer's Mission and into Fort of Death. Fort of Death is fine. It's much more simplistic in that it's a straight action film, but there's nothing offensively wrong with it or anything. Um, and then Eight Men to Kill, a film that I wasn't really enjoying the first half, and then just have the second half just be a complete downer for me. Yeah, it's a bit of a tough way to end a series that I feel like had a lot of promise.
yeah. And I suppose overall, looking at this release, the way I see it now, having watched them all twice, um, and actually I even watched Killer's Mission 3 times because I did watch with the commentary once. Um, I do very much look at this box set as like you get Killer's Mission and then the other two are like additional context or additional stuff if you want it. I know that's probably demeaning those as separate films, but that's kind of just how I look at this one now.
Would you, and again, this is just pure speculation, but you'd wonder if the other two films were put out just because it would have been weird not to.
I mean, yeah, perhaps. I look, I appreciate them being there because I would have much preferred to have seen them than to have not, having enjoyed the first one.
Yeah, you'd be
Um, so I think,
curious.
so I think as a box set and a package, it works really well. But I don't look at this set as three equal films, and I suppose that's why the two sequels are on one disc, aren't they? So
That's true.
it is very much like here's Killer's Mission, and here's the rest.
Here's the rest if you want to see what
Yeah,
happens next.
yeah.
Interesting. Perfect. Well, I've said all I need to say about these films. Any other kind of final thoughts before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. I think, I had a great time with these films.
Hmm.
And I would say to if anyone is listening to this and they're maybe on the fence about this one, I'd say give it a shot. Definitely give it a try. Um, and I've just been loving all of the Japanese films that Radiance have been releasing. I've seen a few people, and I don't know why people have this opinion, but I've seen a couple of people say, "Oh, why is Radiance releasing so many Japanese films?" But I mean, to me, it doesn't matter where a film comes from. If a film is entertaining, if it's got value, I'll watch it. Um, I don't know if you've heard that from anyone. It's just comments I've
No,
seen.
I
Just,
haven't actually. And
yeah,
it's a bit of a weird comment to make because yeah, they have a fair number of Japanese. They probably have more Japanese films than they have any other singular nation. But it's not like
mm,
it's not like half the movies are Japanese or anything. So it's a
yeah,
bit of a weird gripe to have.
and they've released quite a few Italian films, and I've not seen anyone say,
Yeah.
stop with the Italian films. So, um,
Yeah, Italy's
yeah, just
probably close second in terms of singular nation uh
yeah,
releases. Because obviously it's been a few Petris and Damiani's now when you take in when you take the September slate into account, a few Damiani's and Petris now getting added to the bunch.
yeah.
Italy's probably right up there,
And you got
alongside
the
Japan.
you got the Dino Risi box there.
Oh
You've
yeah, of
got
course, yeah, the three comedies,
uh, yeah. So yeah, there's
Bava.
quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely a weird comment. And yeah, and look, all I would say if you come into this episode, you know, either thinking about buying the standard edition or maybe you have the limited edition sitting on your shelf for the last 6 months and you've been unsure to watch it, like definitely watch Killer's Mission. Like I would really, really recommend. I think that's a great film, really enjoyable. And then just try the other two and see who you get on. You might enjoy The Fort of Death more than myself and Elliot did. If you're just there to have a fun time with a straight actioner and you're more into the swords than the guns, then Fort of Death might be more up your alley. And then Eight Men to Kill. I just suppose your enjoyment of that is going to be based on how willing you are to overlook some stuff that wouldn't fly these days in terms of like
yeah,
how we treat characters and how we especially women and minorities etc. You couldn't do what they did today. It would be lambasted. So it is very
mm,
much a product of its time perhaps. So if you're well, maybe more willing is a harsh way to put it. If you're someone who can overlook that stuff to maybe take a full product in, you might enjoy Eight Men to Kill more than I did, because the first half of that film is awesome, and I
mm,
was really looking forward, to finishing it, and it was just a tough way to end for me. But um, in terms of like recommending the set, definitely recommend the set. And if you have the limited edition, which is beautiful, I love the hard there's so many companies these days that put out box sets on really thin card, and it annoys me
yeah,
to no end. I love when I can do this. That's you know, if a company lets me bash the shit out of a box without me worrying about it, then I am happy. So all of Radiance releases have been like that, luckily for their box set. So if you have that set, it's beautiful, of course. Um, the special features on the discs are they're not as packed as other releases. There's a video essay, there's an interview, and there's one commentary track for Killer's Mission. There isn't commentary for the other two films. If you have the limited edition, you will also get a booklet which does have some cool essays that kind of give some context to the filmmaking around that time. And then there's also some neat art cards. I don't know anybody who does anything with art cards, but mine just stay in the disc. I don't know if you do anything with art cards, but if you're into art
no,
cards, there are some art cards in the limited edition. If you haven't like cracked that cellophane yet and you want to actually know what's in the box, that is what you'll find. So like every Radiance release, beautifully presented and packaged. Um, and the quality of the films vary a little bit, but I think overall as a series, definitely worth watch.
mm. Yeah. I think I have enough art cards to wallpaper my whole house at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Between art cards and posters, I never need to buy wallpaper ever again.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. So we're going to wrap up this episode. Elliot, thank you again for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. For listeners, in terms of what's coming up next, I will of course be back when the announcements come out in a couple of weeks. So the announcements are due to come out for the kind of January releases on the 9th of October. I'll be recording sometime that week, so I would expect an episode sometime slightly after that. Um, where we'll talk about myself and my guest will talk about the releases that get announced for January 2025, which will be really interesting to see how they're going to start the year. And then we're also going to cover the three films that are coming out this month. Some of you may already have your discs. I do not, unfortunately, but I know obviously there's some layover with shipping stuff out with the new warehouse. But we're going to be talking about those and talking about the releases. So I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Just as a heads up for those, if you are enjoying the Vault episodes, there probably won't be another Vault episode until November. I have quite a hectic October in my personal life, so I don't see a world where I'm going to be able to sit down and record another Vault episode. So if you are a fan of this kind of ongoing series I'm going to be doing until I run out of films, we'll be back in November. Haven't decided what we're going to be covering or anything like that. That's to be determined. But if you follow on Twitter, I'll put a tweet out usually a week in advance to give people a heads up about what we're going to be talking about if you want to watch the films in advance. Same with the Facebook group. If you happen to be in the Facebook group, hi. And, feel free to, have a chat with me if you want. I like talking about this stuff, not just on podcasts, but in general. So yeah, I'll wrap up there. Elliot, again, thank you. You're an absolute gentleman, and I really, really, really appreciate you taking some time to talk about these movies with me.
No, the pleasure was all mine, and it was I really enjoyed the discussion, so I hope other people do as well.
I'm sure they will. And like I said earlier, Elliot's links will be in the description. If for some reason you don't follow him on, subscribe to him on YouTube or follow him on Instagram, definitely do that. I'll pop those links down there. And yeah, we'll catch you on the flip side. Cool. We'll wrap that up then.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description.
The audio commentary. It's a dying art form, but here at One Track Mind, I, your wonky yet affable host Ryan Luis Rodriguez, analyze film through the prism of these embryonic forms of podcasting, one audio commentary at a time. Masterpieces, crapster pieces, live action, animation, cult classics, films literally no one has ever heard of. No track is too small and no track is too big. Join me and my guests from the entertainment world as we keep these features alive every other Tuesday. Hey, who else is going to discuss Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey one week and Citizen Kane the next? Us, that's who. Sure, you have to put up with my voice, but there's a certain give and take in this industry. That's One Track Mind, part of the Someone's Favorite Productions family and available wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.